You're live, David.
Hello and welcome to another Social Media Today Hangout on Air. And this one is a little bit different to what you're usually used to. We know Hangouts are useful in terms of branding. We know they can help with the connectivity with the audience. And we know that they can actually help in the impact and reach of a brand. What we don't know is actually the mechanics behind them. And this week, today, we have NOD3x with us, which is one of the, probably the only semantic analytics tool you should be looking at. And we will actually try and unpack the entire thing for you, looking at the mechanism behind it and how everything connects. So with that, we're going to introduce the people who are here with us today, who are Lee from NOD3x and John.
Hey guys, thanks for having us.
You're most welcome. And let's start a little bit by prefacing exactly what's happened. Over the last week, we had a hangout on air with which we looked at franchises. We used a specific hashtag to actually promote that, and there was very specific pre-hangout activity, the hangout activity itself, when it happened during it, and the stuff which happened afterwards. And every one of those stages had a specific intent, it had a specific impact point, and we tried to analyze a number of things. So with that, John, if you would just tell us a little bit about NOD3x and how it does that.
Yeah, again, thanks for having us. Basically, what I was approached with was the idea of trying to see the difference between an engagement broadcast versus a more traditional broadcast. So on television, you'll see the speakers on stage or whatever, of an event, but there's not a lot of interaction between that speaker and the audience. Versus the HOA, at least the HOA that is run by you guys, is much more interactive. So there's an audience involved, there are questions, there's the comment stream, there's the conversation going on between the audience and the speakers. So it's a very different form of broadcasting. So that was the original premise, to kind of see what the difference between them would be. So what we did was we tracked and set up tracking for 4 different type of events. Well, 4 different events, basically the one with you guys and then 3 others to use for kind of comparison. So what we're doing is tracking the hashtag SMTPowerTalk for you guys, and we're setting a specific date range so that we can, like you said, see the pre-activity, the event activity, and then some of the post-activity. So, and we've done that for the other 3 events also. And the other 3, we've got our TEDx Baltimore, which was a local TEDx event that was going on that we're tracking. I'll give you the dates for that. Was January 29th through the 4th of February. And then we're tracking the Walking Dead Hangout with hashtag TWD Hangout, which is very large. Most of their audience is on Twitter. And we'll see some of the activity that we tracked relating to Twitter. And then Redneck a Book, that's an interesting one. John Ellis mentioned this to me, that we ought to see what the At Midnight people are doing on Twitter. So that's like a live television broadcast comedian, and to my understanding, they choose a hashtag and then they produce a whole event, sort of a television event around that hashtag. So we found a hashtag that they were using called Redneck a Book, and we're tracking Redneck a Book.
Okay.
So,
and I think for the audience here, perhaps it's worth noting that the moment a hashtag is used, not only does it help track activity across separate social networks, but also between the online and offline world as well.
Yes. Using hashtags is really a very powerful way of connecting information together. And tracking things with NOD3x, really, you can start to see. We've got the word cloud, which will bring out the most popular words and hashtags being used. And so with some of these projects, you can see big and bold the hashtag right in the middle of the conversation. So yes.
Okay, that's brilliant. And let's quantify. Essentially, data has an impact point every time it's generated. It goes across the volume, variety, velocity, and veracity kind of confirmation about it, and every time that is unique depending on the activity. Is that about right, John?
Yes, definitely unique. The data is very unique to each event, and so you want to start looking at some of the data?
Yeah, I mean, what we'd like to see is, we started some pre-post activity, pre-hangout activity for the SMT Power Talk, and we'd like to see the reach of that, and also how it impacted. How did it actually? What was it that made it travel so far, and what was the impact point from a very human perspective rather than a data-centric one?
Okay. So let's just talk about reach first. You
Okay.
all reached 4.6 million people with 56 authors, and there were 71 posts across mostly Google Plus and Twitter. There's a tiny bit of activity. There's a little bit of activity on Facebook and a little bit on YouTube, but the majority of the activity happened on Google Plus and Twitter. And to me, looking at our node graph, which is something we've got a screenshot of, the activity was much different because of the nature of the engagement you all were doing with your audience. So what I saw was a lot more reshares and a lot more activity around the posts. Even though there were only 71, the reach was 4.6 million, which is much larger than you typically would get with only 71 posts. So
what would you ascribe that to?
Go ahead.
What would you ascribe that to?
Honestly, I think it's the engagement. Because people feel a part of the conversation, they then, more of themselves is in it. So they want to share that with other people, their peers, for example. That's how I feel. It's very different, very different.
So essentially engagement, when we talk about engagement, that's the metric that actually begins to amplify a lot of the elements we talk about when it comes to data. So the moment we generate reach and we have really good content, the engagement itself becomes the point where a certain degree of amplification begins to take place.
Yes, I'd say resonance. What you're saying now, it sounds like the word resonance, which is very kind of it's one of the pieces to the influencer algorithm. Lee knows a bit more about this than I do, but essentially, when an author makes a post on Google Plus or any other network, the amount of activity on that post is a measure of the resonance that post had with the audience. And so when a broadcast engages an audience, the resonance with that audience is much, much different than when it's simply a one-way broadcast.
Right, yeah, absolutely. And I think it makes the point again in terms of the need to have the kind of content that actually generates the kind of interaction with the audience. So just scripting something and presenting it to them because that's how you feel it should be is not perhaps the best way to move forward in a live broadcast or in a hangout on air where there's a fluidity to the entire conversation.
Yes, agreed. And one of the things, I mentioned the word cloud earlier, and I'll mention it again because really, if you wanted to set up an engagement broadcast ahead of time, what you could do is begin to track a conversation, and then by tracking it, learn the conversation that's going on already and align your production with that conversation. And so at the time of the event, the resonance becomes amplified.
Right, and this is exactly where the necessity perhaps to plan a pre-hangout on air publicity, track that, analyze it, understand where the sentiment impact points begin to actually resonate, and then shape your hangout on air on the day, on the live event, to actually address the issues that your audience is most interested in.
Absolutely. Aligning content with conversation is what that is all about.
Brilliant. And can you show us a little bit perhaps of how it goes from the pre to actually the event on the actual event on the day itself, and then the post hangout activity?
Sure. You wanted me to share my screen here, and I can show you the.
Yeah, if that's easy, that'd be brilliant.
Yeah. Just give me a second here. Okay, so what I'm sharing now is our live feeds module. Well, this is our entire dashboard, but at the top of the screen you'll see the graph, and each point on it is hoverable, so you can see the activity. So here we're seeing the activity on February 11th for your Power Talk from last the February 11th. So that was the actual event day, and here's the day before. So you can see that obviously the activity it spikes here. But this is interesting. There's even more activity the next day on Google Plus than there was on the event day, which shows me that people really they're engaging this topic. This is not something that's just whizzed by their desk.
Yes.
This is something they care about.
Yeah. And this is the power of the conversation in its
Yes,
full flow, really, isn't it?
absolutely. So we can also let's go and we can look at another one here. This is TEDx Baltimore. Now there was much less activity on Google Plus, but you can just see from the graph. Okay, here's the event day, so the spike, it just peters off from there. Now there's a little bit extra here, but it's much different than over here. We've got this nice peak.
Yes.
And this,
And I think that's a brilliant one, because essentially TED Talks are very powerful. They're essentially shaped around an emotional impact point. So they always resonate with the audience and they always create a powerful impact, but there's not a lot of conversation happening afterwards because it's still a one-way broadcast system.
yes, definitely. And look at the reach numbers. I mean, you've got 1.1 million with 163 authors versus 4.6 million with half the authors.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
different. It's very different.
Yes, and that also shows the power of the profiles themselves, which actually, or the people themselves,
Yes,
who get pulled into the conversation.
absolutely.
And perhaps a point should be made here about creating the kind of conversation that makes it easy for people to actually get pulled into and engage with. They need to feel it's accessible, they need to feel it applies to them, and they need to feel that they actually have perhaps a stake in the outcome of the conversation by contributing to the flow of it.
Absolutely. And then with the show prep that you were talking about earlier, identifying influencers, people with large audiences, but with large audiences who resonate with the topic.
Yes.
Identifying them ahead of time, and you then have aligned the show day with a larger audience, it becomes exponential quickly.
Yes, absolutely. And I must say, this is a brilliant point, because this is something we don't actually do, and we should. We should actually learn to do this, because essentially there are people there who have their own following, which is quite large and quite significant. And some of them do focus on the things we talk about, and being able to identify them and leveraging their audience in itself helps them, because they become part of the conversation much sooner, but also it helps us reach that audience in a much more cost-effective way, in a much easier way, and it amplifies the signal. And this is something we haven't done yet, but we should.
Yes, I agree. It's a good point. Yes.
Again, on this point, essentially this is what we mean by influencer marketing, right? So essentially, it's not picking out profiles out of a hat with large follow numbers and targeting them and saying, "Hi, why don't you share my stuff?"
Much different approach.
Yeah. But it's actually finding people who are invested in what you're covering and working with them to help their audience and help them, and then they help you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, in the post Hangout activity, I mean, can we compare it to perhaps Walking Dead? Because I absolutely love that show. I want to see how it goes. Yeah.
Well, let's just okay. So here's the live feeds module of the Walking Dead Hangout, and Twitter activity is huge. Now you can't really see. Okay, they've reached 95 million people. It's a much different scale. But let me switch over to the relations graph. Well, it's going to take a long time to load that. John, do you have the relations graph?
Yeah, let me pull up the relations graph and give me your face back.
Okay. There it is. Beard and all.
Awesome. That's very
I'm
cool.
getting deja vu from the green room. Just saying.
Right. So what John's pulling up is the relations graph, which shows graphically the engagement that is happening around this topic. So we'll see a bunch of dots on the screen, which is the node graph, and each color is representative of a different type of activity. So we've got the original posts in blue, we've got comments in purple, although on Twitter comments aren't tracked in the same way. So you've got reshares or retweets, which are in green, and then the favorites, which are in orange. So we can visually see how the activity is occurring and what's going on. And basically with The Walking Dead, there were a ton of posts and a lot of plus mentions or favorites, excuse me, but not a lot of reshares. They're just, as I recall, there were almost no reshares or retweets of the activity. So it's a really one-directional broadcast with a bunch of people plus oneing or favoriting, but not reshares.
So this is more like an acknowledgement, right? So they're acknowledging it's there and it has a value to them, but not sufficient value for them to become engaged further.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly right, it seems.
Okay. All right. So if we look at the way that can we compare perhaps how we did across all the different social networks and get an idea of NOD3x's ability to track this?
Sure. Going back to the SMTPowerTalk,
yeah.
We can see percentages across the networks, and the same for all the others. We've got, interestingly, the TEDx Baltimore event, we had 25% of all the activity was happening on Instagram, which is, it's kind of a newer phenomenon, but as Lee was mentioning in the green room, it's really a place where there's a lot of activity happening that a lot of marketers and a lot of people just aren't aware of. So I was interested to see the TEDx Baltimore activity on Instagram. And then let's see here.
Also, Instagram users are very, very savvy when it comes to amplifying or increasing the visibility of their posts, because they're very aware of the hashtags they should be using. You know, it's kind of been almost drummed into them right from the very beginning, which is not quite like the same as Facebook and things like that. But
Yep. And this is the branding effect really that goes on there. You're quite right. Yeah. And this also showcases a little bit perhaps, and that's a really important point that Lee has just made, because essentially the behavior of the audience in each social media platform is different because of the way they actually use that platform. And it's wrong to assume that as you move from one to the other, you will be able to use exactly the same approach or exactly the same messages, because they're not going to actually reflect the audience's experience of how the platform operates.
Exactly. I mean, you know, you switch from social network to social network, and hashtags will change, you know, in order of favoritism and per country, and also on a per genre and gender basis as well, even on a per language basis. You know, so basically you could organize your opinion or the sentiment and look at specifically at females that, you know, enjoyed your show, you know, and look at the hashtags on those for those people that are living in the States, and compare them exactly the same gender and say in English, but for the UK, completely different, and it will always be. And the same applies to Twitter. You know, the resonance will be very different. It's very much let's have a look at the hashtags I'm used to and what should be applied, you know, rather than what is consistent across all three, which always tends to cause a little bit of confusion when tracking things. But this is where hashtags from a semantic basis actually work more, rather than trying to track a specific keyword.
Okay, I mean, that's two very important points right there. I mean, the first one, and let's get the technical one out of the way first. We talked about semantics, and essentially here are hashtags which are linked in terms of the meaning behind them or the thematic linking. So, you know, they reflect the subject you're talking about and the domain expertise, and they're the ones that are actually used across different platforms. So if they're different, they should actually be linked in that way, creating a category in itself. And the second broader point that Lee has made in quite a lot of detail really is the fact that despite the fact that we're talking about data, we're analyzing the way data behaves in each different platform and how the audience interacts with it. We're still talking, when it comes to resonance, about people. We're talking about reaching people in order to get an emotional response. And if you can't do that, well, first of all, you don't understand your subject well enough in order to be able to shape it in a way that resonates. And secondly, arguably, you don't understand your audience well enough in order to be able to connect with them. And this is where all these disconnects come in place. So technology is actually, you know, using NOD3x we can peel back the barriers and begin to interact using the smart technology at a very human level.
You can even see, just talking about understanding your audience, further than just the words they're using, the hashtags they're using, you can see what type of media they prefer to share. So Google Plus, we've got a lot of image preference, but on Instagram you may have more videos preferred. Obviously, different networks, people prefer different types of media. So, as a brand or as a person trying to resonate with your audience, understanding what type of media I should be putting into the content I'm providing is very, very helpful.
Yes, absolutely. And again, this is something which we haven't yet done enough of in putting together the SMTPowerTalk, simply because there hasn't been a lot of time. But it's also the awareness is not quite there, even for us, because this is a very new thing, and we think that we know how the Instagram crowd, in a broader sense, actually operates, but we don't until we actually look at the analysis, we do the data, we look at the data, do the analysis, and actually draw the inferences which allow us to understand this.
It's all about building those connections and identifying them, right? Instagram is, when we decided to implement Instagram, it was primarily because they could also share video there, and that kind of broadened it beyond the normal, well, I'll just send an image out. And to see people being very creative and very inventive of how they're repurposing content, and thematically linked content, linking back to different places for additional information is actually really worth having a nose around.
Yep. And on that note, I think whenever we do a SMTPowerTalk, Alex is always keeping a very careful eye on the streams itself, and this is essentially our eyes and ears across different social networks, and it's not an easy job to do while you're actually paying attention to what's happening in the Hangout itself. So Alex, as you've been doing that, having a bird's eye view of everything, have you got a sense that people are using each social network in a slightly different way that is actually noticeable as you're tracking it?
Yeah, I mean, right now for the SMTPowerTalk, we're really just doing Google Plus and Twitter, but even those two platforms have been very different. Google Plus, people want to just, they really just want to have a conversation, and they like to ask very in-depth questions. Twitter, with at least the last episode, I think it has to do with the character limit, but they were much they're much shorter in their responses. They're very careful about when they choose to respond versus, Google Plus, everybody likes to come in and say, hey, how's it going? And they say hi to everybody else. So it's much more conversation, whereas Twitter, they only seem to tweet something when they actually have something that they feel is important to say, if that makes sense.
It does, and I think that they're being more economic with their activity, really, aren't they? Because it has to count. You're absolutely right. And again, these are things we don't actually think of when we actually do these things until we analyze them and begin to quantify them. And again, it's a very human thing. Perhaps in G+, because we can engage so easily, we can afford to, for lack of a better word, waste a lot of connection time in a social format. But in Twitter, which is shaped so tightly, they will only interact if you have those strong impact points that actually makes them interact with the activity. And if you don't have enough of them, you'd get no interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of interaction, we have a comment from Peter Feltham. I apologize if I totally messed that up. But he's talking about the point that Lee brought up in regard to languages and hashtags. And he says, I suspect, gut feeling, that some of the different hashtags in different human languages could actually resolve to common terms. Is there any way to couple such like hashtags in the analysis tools platform?
Yes and yes. You're right on both counts, and your gut feeling is absolutely spot on. Certainly, I speak a limited amount of French, but enough to kind of converse. But when I'm, say, writing in French, then I'll try and look for a term or apply that term as a hashtag, primarily because I know it. All right.
Fair enough.
But you know, I'm not alone here. Unless you're absolutely 100% conversant and fluent in it, you know, in another language, then you will tend to utilize a hashtag that A is being used more commonly that you see in posts, or B, resolve it to a word that you actually know yourself, which might actually not be the best word to use. You know, it may not even be grammatically correct to actually use it in that context. However, we will use it. However, having said that, from a coupling perspective, yes, we do. And on the NOD3x dashboard, those hashtags are actually grouped together in a specific module on the dashboard itself.
Right, absolutely. And just to broaden that question by Peter, essentially when it comes to semantics and mapping, you can map one word onto another, then all the attributes are transferred to that. And essentially it's the attributes of that word which quantified as an entity. Yeah. So it's a direct map, yeah. It's a direct mapping and hashtags help there.
Very much so.
If we talk about, you know, you track the three, can we, John, is there a possibility or an option to actually look at the three events and see how they sort of compare to each other side by side if possible?
Yes, we can do some of that. It's it's a little bit of a difficult comparison because of the amount of activity that you guys get on Google Plus that the other three do not. But let me show you.
That's because we're bigger than Walking Dead, right?
it's just clear. But what I can show you is a comparison between The Walking Dead on Twitter and you guys on Twitter. So let me, if I may, share my screen again. I've just pulled them up here. This is The Walking Dead engagement graph. So basically what we're seeing here is all the activity that happened. We've got 6,954 total nodes, and that is a combination of original posts, of which there were 73% of this total were original posts, 27% are favorites. And again, we've got no reshares, or rather retweets. So it's kind of a, like you said, Dave, it's an acknowledgement that the conversation is happening, or rather the broadcast is happening, but it's not, people don't seem to be as interested. Now let me show you what your guys' activity looks like on Twitter. There's a lot fewer nodes, but what's interesting to me is that there's 25% of the activity are retweets. So people do care about the conversation that's happening.
Yes.
And I think that a retweet, because typically you'll add a little bit of a comment in with your retweet, so we could even see this as, you know, a retweet is also kind of like a comment. Basically, the conversation here is, there's more of it going on, and we can see this, you know, original post here, here, here. They've all got activity around them and retweets.
Well, what's interesting for me on that one, if I can just add a little bit to it, is that you look at the Walking Dead one, and because of the lack of reshares or retweets that are taking place, you're seeing very much a siloed visualization. And when I say siloed, you know, you're seeing practically 6 clusters there, where so basically 6 people are getting all of the favorites, if you like, you know, on their posts. So 6 posts that are just resonating completely, you know. Whereas when you get a retweet or a reshare, you're expanding beyond your first tier network, and therefore that's where the awareness starts to increase on the brand, or you as a personal brand, and also the type of content that you're trying to create awareness of.
Yep. And again, this is a hugely important point. And I mean, The Walking Dead is a hugely successful, and it has a massive following. But so, you know, when they actually post, I suppose they post to the converted, they're not trying to reach very far, or even maybe they're not even trying very hard right now. But if you are a brand and you actually wanted to get people interested in what you're doing, you really need to create a conversation, and you really need to create a buzz around your name. And this is exactly what Lee actually explained here in terms of getting people to reshare, getting people to talk about you, getting people to spread the word through their connections and through their activity to a lot more people, which then brings in more attention to a brand, and the interest begins to peak. People become more aware of what's going on, and they're more likely to participate in future activities. And that very much relies on the crafting of the content, the understanding of the audience, the clear idea of where the emotional points lie and where the commonalities lie, perhaps. If we talk about a traditional brand, you need to have that shared sense of values where what's important to the brand is also important to the audience of the brand, or the perspective of the audience.
Can you imagine what would happen if The Walking Dead realized that and started doing what you guys do? I'm saying
it would take over the world, right?
Everyone and their mother would know about what was going on.
Well, I think they're missing a massive opportunity to work with NOD3x here, because they don't know what they don't know.
More.
And this is very much a learning experience for us as well, because although we do a lot of the things, and I use NOD3x personally, and we use it in the planning a little bit of the SMTPowerTalks, we don't use it enough because we haven't got enough time, and also a lot of the times we don't have sufficient awareness of the things which we discussed now. So this is very much a learning point for us as well, in terms of how we should plan perhaps a little bit better, and then follow up a little bit better, and that allows us to both reach a greater audience, but also amplify the conversation.
Yes, I think understanding the questions that you need to ask is kind of a first step. And then,
Yes.
you've got NOD3x shows you all this data, but if you don't know what questions you need to be asking, the data is not so helpful. But once you do know, like you've just kind of come to a realization, a little preparation time, a kind of a connection with that conversation ahead of time can really bring things into a much larger, different state on the event day. And then subsequently, I would think, for following days also.
Yes.
Just as a comparison, because I think it's important just to look at apples and apples and oranges, right? We've just seen on Twitter where, you've got 6,000, and as John correctly described, nodes, but those nodes are actually people and a tweet, yeah? And then you saw SMTPowerTalk, but if we're able to then just compare with what happened on Google, yeah, on Google+, actually, the Walking Dead hangout peaked at 34 posts on Google.
Yeah.
All right, so looking at it for like, I know because there's people going to be watching this and going, well, that's not very many for SMTPowerTalk on Twitter and stuff like that. But then, The Walking Dead does have huge communities on Google+, right? And they didn't actually achieve anywhere near what SMTP.
But it's not. I mean, it's not a fascinating point really, because essentially a lot of the branding or a lot of the marketing that they do is very much traditional corporate mentality, brand orientated. So they tend to start off with a specific aim in mind. They prepackage it, they put it out there, and there's not a lot of leeway for changing any of that on the fly or for engaging an audience in terms of the interaction that's important to the audience itself. It's very much what's important to the show in terms of their brand image.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating, because you're right. They did the same thing they did in Twitter. In Twitter, they already have a ready-made audience that received that message, and they said, yes, fine, and they didn't do anything with it. In Google+, it traveled even less, because
Let me just show you. This is The Walking Dead on Google+. I mean, virtually no activity. We've got 2 plus ones, so 4%, and only 46 people, essentially. And then over here, here's what you guys look like. Much, much more activity. This is just beautiful. We've got reshares and activity on those reshares of reshares. I mean, this is breaking out into areas of Google+ that The Walking Dead just can't do with the activity, with the type of broadcast that they're doing. They cannot achieve what you guys achieve.
Whoa, the SMTPowerTalk is bigger than The Walking Dead.
Google Plus, there's no doubt.
Get that quote out there now.
You know, me and Alex right now feel really big in our heads.
Good job.
We'll have autographs after the show in the lobby.
You guys are celebrities. You didn't even know it.
No idea. Nobody told us. We needed NOD3x for that. You know,
It tells you.
that's actually quite interesting. John, would you take about a few minutes just to explain a little bit of how NOD3x works? Because I mean, you're mining all this data, you're following all these things, but you know, for the novice user, and NOD3x is free to anybody in G+, right? So they can actually just log in with their G+ ID and log in and try it. But for the novice user, you just explain very briefly what it does and how they would go about tracking anything.
Absolutely. In fact, just this morning, I forget the lady's name, but I'll look it up again. She said, look, I'm not technical, but you told me how to start a project, and then you told me a little bit about what I'm doing, and here I'm finding connections that I would never have found otherwise. So basically, we like to talk of it in terms of data, like just discovery, social discovery. So when you arrive on Google+, you may be new. I was new a year and a half ago. Everyone was new at one point. We don't know who to connect with. We don't know where the conversations are happening, but we kind of have an understanding of what we're interested in. So what NOD3x is able to do is you just give it a topic, basically. You can start with a hashtag. It's a good place to start because of its semantic relevance to the conversation. So you find a hashtag, and then you put it in NOD3x and you let it go for a few hours, and you come back. And what you'll start seeing are who's influential in this space, where the conversations are happening, what those conversations are, and how to connect with that conversation. You can click in the dashboard, all these little dots are clickable, and they'll pull up the post, and you can engage directly from the dashboard. So you can quickly start becoming part of the conversation with NOD3x, having no idea really who you should be connecting with, because NOD3x shows you pretty easily who those people are.
And it's very intuitive to use as well, isn't it, really? It doesn't need sort of hours and hours of training.
Agreed. You can go as deep as you want, and Lee has gone, he's well, amazingly what he can do with this software. But yes, in just a very short period of time, with a little bit of instruction, which we've got a couple of YouTube videos and a community on Google+, we're happy to show you. Yeah, you can really quickly become part of a conversation.
Great. Okay, and let's discuss now a little bit. Suppose Alex has got a question, I think, or a comment. Let's address that first.
Yeah, it's another comment from Peter, and I want to address it because I think putting value on a reshare versus a retweet is an interesting discussion to have. So he says G+, a reshare is potentially a referral conversation, potentially being ignited all over the place, a much more powerful notion than just a retweet. And I'm curious if that's what you guys are saying. Is a Google+ reshare more powerful than a retweet?
Isn't that a brilliant way of putting it, Peter? And actually, I'm very grateful you brought this up, because you're quite right. A retweet is not the same as a reshare in Google+, because the platform itself is very different. And I know from myself, when I actually retweet something, all I'm doing is passing it along. I'm not really starting a new conversation. I think, you know, this is important, and I'll pass it along, and somebody else will probably pass it along as well. So we probably amplify it, but we amplify it times, you know, a smaller number than we would perhaps in Google+. But in Google+, when we actually reshare something, we want to actively engage around that point, so it potentially can become a much bigger amplification point when we actually talk about brand values, but also it becomes a very real conversation. We begin to unpack it to quite a great degree, and this is the big attraction of Google+, and the impact it can have for a brand. John, have you got anything to add to this?
I do. I'm always full of opinions and ideas.
That's good.
On Google+, I do. You're right. This idea that when I reshare, that's starting a new conversation. It's topically relevant. But I tell you, many, many times, my level of understanding a subject that I've posted on becomes much more detailed, given the conversation points that continue to ripple through the network. So it's, to me, kind of like crowdsourcing knowledge around the topic. Very interesting.
The other thing, okay, you have similarity where you have an amplification. You're going beyond or extending the initial reach of that post by, number of followers to the power X. Yeah. But that's really where the similarity lies, and what both you absolutely 100% correctly are stating. The difference is, as you're saying, with Google+, you start this conversation, and then you actually, every word that you're adding value in your introduction to your network, while you're sharing it to your network, while you feel it's of value to be shared to your network, creates a resonance with them. You're aligning that initial post, which people at first glance might go, why the hell is David and John sharing this right now? It's nothing at all like they normally share. But it's that introductory part which is the bridger, if you like. It's the bridge which connects the content with your network, right? And then the ensuing discussions that take place within the commentary add additional value. The comments are actually where the goal is, right? And then every step of the way, you're building awareness, you're aligning people with content, helping people understand, they're helping you understand more, and before you know it, your post has then got a reshare, all right? And that reshare is very different than the initial reshare, and also very different from the retweet.
Isn't that, this is brilliant, because essentially, we do a lot of these things instinctively. We don't really quantify them very much, but you're right. When you pointed out, and John just pointed out something really important, all this bridging content, which you mentioned, the introduction, and then the ensuing conversation, essentially add layers of understanding, which is what makes the conversation so addictive and so sticky for people, that they actually, inside your head, you're not just typing things on the screen, but ideas begin to actually form and take shape. And that's a very powerful thing. And it doesn't happen so easily on other social platforms because the depth of engagement isn't quite there to the same degree, which is what makes G+ so unique in many respects.
Yeah, completely agree.
I've never been attracted to social media until I arrived on Google+. And when I got there, it took me about a week, and I was like, oh, this is different. This is something that's very valuable.
Yeah, we all sense that, don't we? But I think it also becomes incredibly powerful when we begin to strip it back and look at all the layers and actually understand what it is. And ultimately, we're discussing comments and bridging points of data, which is the introduction. But essentially, it's just people doing a very people thing. You're sharing opinions and ideas, and then you're using the crowd in a broader sense of the word, as John said, to test the validity of those ideas and reshape and reform the opinions. So in the best possible scenario, you start something and an hour later you leave the screen a changed man, right?
That's it.
If I could have a t-shirt for each post and comment that's inspired me to do something, I'd never have to wash a t-shirt again.
Yep.
That's awesome. Okay, John, if you were, let's flip this on its head now. If you were advising us on how to, having looked at the data, if you were advising us how to best formulate our next Hangout on Air from a brand impact stroke marketing point of view, what would you advise us to do?
Well, I think we've touched on several of the points already. A little bit of pre-activity to see where that conversation is, what that conversation is, who do I need to be connecting this material with, who are the people that are resharing it most, who is this really resonating with, whose audiences do I need to potentially be looking at to get this into the hands of the right people. I would look at the node graph, and this is something that Lee can really make fly. I can do it a little bit, but looking at how posts move through networks and who the responsible people are for that movement, and understanding who they are, connecting with them, connecting with their story, connecting your story with their story, that really can build on a platform that you guys already have. I think I definitely see the beginnings of the type of activity that really will move through the network.
Yeah.
But connecting with those people, we see them as nodes, but they're people. Connecting with them on a deeper level, I think is an opportunity for you guys.
Right. And there's also NodeX also allows sentiment mining to a large extent, which is also very important in terms of both a marketing point of view, a branding point of view, brand impact. So how does it go about that?
Lee?
Okay. That was nicely dodged, John. When we first set up NodeX, we added sentiment mining onto it. Initially onto the actual post being written and being shared, and then also onto the comments. For us, it was It was always leading towards the comments, because someone writes the post from a very subjective perspective, and then people read that post subjectively and sometimes objectively after the second time they've reread it, and then they form an opinion. So initially we did call it sentiment, and then we renamed it to opinion analysis, because we felt opinion actually is better understood for the majority of people as opposed to sentiment. But figuratively they are one and the same. However, when we're looking at the various opinions and how they differ from platform to platform, I mean, they are a boat ride away from social network to social network to social network. And there are plenty of software that do this out there, but we decided to write our own rather than lease a third-party one. So it's been continuously developed actually for 4 years now, and constantly being refined. And every interaction that our users have with the posts actually train NodeX to be that much better at it.
So it's machine learning essentially, isn't it? It's a machine learning algorithm.
Yeah, constantly.
That's pretty cool. So just recapping from an entirely brand-driven or marketing sort of perspective, the value of NodeX to a brand or a company is quite a lot in terms of both reach, audience engagement, and opinion stroke sentiment.
Yeah.
And it's providing an opportunity for brands to, I don't know, I always think of the company Comcast, which is a cable internet provider here in the US. A lot of people don't like Comcast because their customer service,
that's so true.
there's something to be desired. But listen, what an opportunity for a company like Comcast is, using opinion analysis from NodeX, you can see where those conversations are happening on social media very quickly, where you need to be engaging. You need to be attending to that person's opinion about you, because in the case of Comcast, it's often negative. But it doesn't have to be negative. It's just something where they could jump in and say, hey, look, I'm sorry, your service sucks right now. Let me do something about it.
Don't hold back. Say what you mean. And I know.
Right. Again, my opinion.
I'm very fortunate to have Comcast as a sponsor today of SMTP.
Yes, no, no, believe me.
No, but seriously, I mean, David, you mentioned something really, really important, that yourselves, you don't always have enough time, and I know we all help brands of all different sizes and things like that. And what I've come to see, that no matter what size of business or organization, there is never enough resource, all right, in terms of manpower. And being from the development side of NodeX, one of the key things is that we don't have enough people. I use NodeX and develop NodeX to help me answer our clients' questions faster. All right. Now I can't sit in front of NodeX 24/7. I don't have that luxury. So how can I be in front of NodeX without being in front of NodeX to make sure I'm not missing anything? Well, one of the key things we've added into it is that you've got a notification system. already built in. So NOD3x will email you when it happens, or once a day, or once a week, or once a month as a full report. You know, if you're looking for negative reputation management issues, you know, then you can say, right, I need to email person A, B, C, D, and E if this happens, all right, in relation to this topic. However, I need the system to email F, G, H, I, J if that happens, all right. And if something good happens, you know, which always does with Comcast, then you know, then we need to email the CEO to tell everybody there that how good a job they're doing, all right. So you can set up all these different projects in NOD3x which are doing a very specific thing, so you don't have to sit in front of it. But when something does happen, you're made aware of it, and then you can judge what level of priority that is for you in order to jump onto it or not, you know.
That's brilliant. And I think he also, I mean, I'm really glad you brought this up, really, because although we're not really talking about it in terms of the SMTPowerTalk series, NOD3x is a fantastic tool when it comes to reputation monitoring, where you can use it to understand what's being said about you, change, hopefully, and affect it.
Yeah. I mean, from a customer service issue, if someone says, you know, oh, we've tried, you know, baked beans made by Apple, you know, and we don't like those baked beans. And this person is saying they don't like Apple baked beans.
Do they have round corners? Or?
They may well do, yeah. You know. Actually, I think people are complaining because they have a bite out of each of the baked beans, but but it means then you can address on a one-to-one basis and deal with a customer service issue, you know, and hopefully resolve that issue, and then turn that person from a detractor into an advocate based on level of customer service.
That's fantastic, and I think that you're absolutely right. And you know, this is the power we have at our fingertips today, because essentially, and I've been active in corporations for a long time, and we've always had analytics tools and analytics teams in place. And I'm using plural here because the analytics department used to be manned by quite a lot of people doing what essentially we can do now with just one click.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's that simple, you know. You were saying before, is it quite intuitive to use? And it, you know, it can be as simple or not. And it's almost likened to if you're starting a search in Google, you know, everything starts with a word.
Yes.
It might not always be
that's simple, yes.
It might not always be the right word, but then you learn, don't you? You know, based on the results that you get. And that's one of the things that we have evolved as humans in terms of technology, to understand that I enter this word, I get those results. Are those results what I want? Yes or no? No, okay, change the word. All right, NOD3x is no different. And it's almost like a social search engine as opposed to a web search. You know?
Yep. And Alex, I think, has a comment there.
I do, and this is an interesting, we've been very positive about the brand using NOD3x, but Tim Sweeney asks, how about using it to monitor your competitors so as to cultivate their unsatisfied customers?
Comcast.
Yeah, you know, I mean, you can do that. Tim, are you thinking about starting a new company, something, a Tincast maybe? You know, and it's absolutely right. You can monitor anything. You know, whether you're trying to see if your competitors or peers, you know, are doing something great that, you know, you should also be doing, or learning from them and applying them to your product or service. Similarly, you know, monitoring for things that maybe they're not doing, and so that you can avoid those pitfalls.
That's super. That's absolutely awesome. And I think, again, it shows the ability to have data at your fingertips in order to understand the impact that you have in a digital domain, because it's not always readily visible. It's not like in the real world you can go outside and shout and see 3 people turn around and look at you, right?
Yeah. Well, it depends where you live, right?
That's absolutely true. Okay.
Just
yeah.
Well, it just reminded me that brands can do this in real time. So that large companies, organizations that want to connect with a topic that's going on right now, NOD3x can show you how to do that right now, in real time, which is very valuable, I think.
And you could conceivably reshape something on the fly, couldn't you? I mean, if you had a broadcast where you can see that, it's not quite having the impact that you want, you could, yeah.
Martin Shervington did that with Lee about a year ago with Canva Quest. So he used NOD3x to understand how their activity was behaving on Google Plus and saw specific areas where he could jump in and amplify in the right places. And they got that thing trending on Google Plus for, I don't know, 36 hours or something. I mean, it was pretty amazing.
That's right. Yeah, I actually remember the campaign. You're quite right. I didn't realize that's what he'd done, but I remember it trending at the time, and he told me that he managed to do it. So that's really fascinating. And I mean, in many ways, it's social engineering on a digital scale, but in a very positive human way, because again, if there's no resonance, you couldn't actually do it.
No, absolutely. I mean, just on a side, as opposed from like information sharing, we just helped in the background a product launch, and we were able to increase their sales by 10% in real time in the last 4 days, just by using NOD3x.
Well, it makes sense. Makes absolutely sense. Okay, we're getting near the top of the hour, really, so we should start wrapping up. Alex, are there any more comments out there?
No, I do want to tell John Ellis, who is producing this, that you got another question about what we're doing with this whole production thing. So shout out to John.
I will jump into the comments as soon as we wrap this up. Thank you, Alex.
You're welcome. But otherwise, no, everyone that seems to be comfortable with the data you have given. So good job, guys.
That's awesome. And yes, shout out to John Ellis, because we don't get to see him. He's behind the scenes. He makes everything happen. But he never comes on the screen itself. So yes, big shout out.
With good reason.
John and Lee, have you got anything to add as we get to the closing point of this?
John?
Sure. I think that, like you said throughout the conversation, David, that kind of knowing what NOD3x is capable of doing is very helpful. And I hope that this show has shown some people how they can use this tool to broaden the conversation, to extend into people's living rooms. I mean, that's what this is all about, is connecting information with the people who want to be connected with that information. And NOD3x is really able to scale up our abilities and augment us in a way that I've never seen any other tool come close to. So I hope that this show has shown people what it can do, and Lee and I are both happy to help anyone who's interested in learning more about the tool to do what we're doing,
Absolutely. I think also, just to add to that, when you're searching on Google or one of your other preferred search engines, let's just say, which is Google.
Are there any others out there?
I forget. But if you were to ask yourself, why are you searching right now? What are you searching for? What result are you trying to get? What answer are you trying to look for? You wouldn't go to Google and just sit in front of it and you just see their home page with this cursor just flashing, and you're looking at the doodles and they're all looking really nice, and you're going, I don't know why I'm here. And similarly, when you start looking into data in general, all right, let's just take NOD3x aside from that, you're going to want to know some answers, and you're going to have some questions that you need answering. Now, one of the biggest challenges is actually finding those questions. But it comes down really, and I'll just summarize it to the 5 W's. If you can ask questions on the who, what, where, when, and why, all right, you're going to be able to ask NOD3x to look at who's posting what, when are they posting it, where is it, who's getting the most engagement, and why is it appearing right now, why is it topical.
That's awesome, and that's really good to actually keep in mind. It's true, without any kind of intent, it's very difficult to achieve anything. And in terms of semantic interaction, whether it's search or any kind of semantic technology, like a semantic analysis tool like NOD3x, intent is everything, because it helps make the data that you need mean something to you at that particular moment in time. That's brilliant. That's really good.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
All right, guys, with that, well, we've seen how powerful analysis is. Essentially, when we market anything in Google+, when we do anything across the web, we use data, we use tools, but behind them and in front of them, there are people. And the points of impact are very human points of impact, and it has to be a clear understanding of where everything connects at a very human level. Otherwise, nothing will happen. And we've seen instances here today where the data didn't resonate as much as it should at a human level, and despite the fact that it was very professionally produced, it didn't have the impact that perhaps a more human and less professional approach did. So keep that in mind. Thank you very much, John and Lee.
Welcome.
Alex, thank you for all your help with this. And thank you for the audience. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.